Hola, hola, everybody. This is Dr. Jflo. I wanted to stop by to wish you happy holidays. Feliz Navidad to those of you who celebrate it, and Happy New Year. Like you may have noticed, we are on a break until February of 2023, when Season 6 of Latinx Can Podcast will begin. But before we tune out to rest for a few weeks, I wanted to say thank you to you for supporting our project and for tuning in every 2 weeks to see what our guests have to offer. You are the reason why we put tremendous effort into interviewing Latinx professionals who are committed to uplifting our community. Today, we are sharing an extract of our conversation with Dr. Linet Mera, co-founder of the Unconscious Bias Project. She shares very useful tips that we can use to fight against unconscious biases and create more inclusive communities. And since this is the season for giving, the Unconscious Bias Project is running an end-of-the-year fundraising. If you find these tips useful, I would like to encourage you to donate to UBP's campaign, Belonging Happens Together. And we have left the links on the show notes for you to make it easy. And one more thing. If you find the information we share on this podcast useful, me gustaría que nos hicieran un regalito de Navidad. Share your favorite episode with a person that may benefit from it. Our wish for this new year is to reach as many people as possible to share actionable advice that can help them turn their dreams into reality. That's it for now. We wish you happy holidays.
And whenever you see that stereotype, replace it. Right? Like that's an easy thing you can do. Start opening your networks. You know, not everything has to be at like a policy national level, but if there's that opportunity, go for it.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Linet Mera, co-founder of the Unconscious Bias Project. And in this second part, Dr. Mera shares practical tools we can use to help address unconscious biases. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. So the work that you do right now with the Unconscious Bias Project is very much linked into trying to create awareness of unconscious biases. Can we talk about what they are and maybe how we see them affecting people in their daily lives?
Yeah, of course. So I think what's really important is to start off with a definition, because even though talking about unconscious bias is like a buzzword now, like much like people talking about being anti-racist is like a buzzword. And it used to be that talking about being woke was one thing, and now it's like a bad thing. And, you know, there's just like this field, because it's about people, it's always evolving, right? So literally pulling up my slides to give you the like official definition that we use in our workshops. And that's, we define bias as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. And when we talk about unconscious or implicit bias, it's bias that you have even though you're not agreeing with it, or even if you don't know it's there. So what does that mean? That means that, for example, my professor who was tapped by President Obama to be on his science council, this is the guy that's like, we want, you know, equality for women. Right? That was his line. Like he literally has his face on top of that line everywhere. This is the same person that wouldn't invite women to go to conferences. So he, on the one hand, is like, I am 100% feminist. You know, I support women in science. I have women in my lab who are scientists. Never even looked at his track record. There are almost no women that went through his lab that are now in professor positions. Like, you know, so that he has unconscious bias against women, right? So you say one thing, and if somebody asks you like, are you a misogynist? You'd say, no, absolutely not, right? And so those are biases that we have. And, you know, I picked him as an example because it's really easy, but you can be biased against your own in-group. So, for example, one of the things that I learned is that even women are more likely to write recommendation letters for women that cite, oh, they're good teachers, they're really great people, as opposed to talking about their scientific skills, for example. So we can be biased against our own in-group. And where do these biases come from? They're really, the way we think about them is that they're coming from stereotypes that are in our world. So what does that mean? That means that could be people that you're talking to, that could be something you see on the TV. Like, quick, think of a scientist right now. Albert Einstein, right? That was the first one you thought. Yeah. Old white guy, right? Like, because that's where you see everywhere, right? In kids shows, who is the scientist? In movies, who's the scientist? In books, who's the scientist? In fiction books, who's the scientist? If someone is like, okay, who is the foremost person in your field? Like, who's the biggest, more impactful paper that you've read in your field recently? Who's going to be cited more? White guys, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in our books, it's in our textbooks, it's on the internet, it's on Twitter, it's everywhere. So when we're dealing with this mountain of stereotypes and ideas about who belongs and who doesn't belong in a field, like, you actually have to work kind of hard to notice. So first step is noticing. Like, notice these associations, notice these stereotypes. Even if you think they're really obvious, notice them. Okay, this is a stereotype. Okay. And then what you want to do is counter that. So whether that's opening up a space for somebody that's different from you, whether it's getting to know, say, a disabled chemist in your field. So for example, one of the techniques that we use in our workshops is stereotype replacement. So as soon as you see another image, for example, another TV show with a stereotype of an aggressive, loud black man, because that's everywhere, or in the news, right? Then immediately think of President Obama. So think of somebody that's counter stereotypical to that stereotype, and that's enough to start reducing your bias. The scientists who study this call it the Obama effect. So all you need to do is like, okay, the next time I see another Albert Einstein, I'm going to think of Marie Curie. I'm going to think of, whatever, like pick your favorite scientist, remember them, remember their characteristics, who they are. And whenever you see that stereotype, replace it, right? Like that's an easy thing you can do. Start opening your networks. Not everything has to be at like a policy national level, but if there's that opportunity, go for it. If there's a vote coming up about, women's rights, if there's a vote coming up about changing how, for example, your university or your work is doing its hiring practices, be vocal, be out there. And if nobody's talking about it, ask about it. One of the other things that we teach folks is to recruit bias buddies. And so we use the term bias buddies. What it means is active allyship. So find people that have different identities than you, that are on the same page with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have them be in the room with you and advocate with you when you're asking for like transparent pay, for example. So it's not just Jenny that's coming. Oh, it's, that Latina woman. That's just, whatever. She's always talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? But maybe it's also Bob, right, that's bringing this up. Maybe it's also, I don't know, Rachna, right? Like maybe it's somebody else. And so, okay, these are all these different people. Maybe they have different levels in the organization than you. Maybe you're the only like manager in that position that's advocating for this, but maybe an employee is also advocating for this. Maybe a C-level person is also advocating for this. And it's like, okay, it's a bigger thing, right?
Yeah, but Linet, how do we ask for things? Because, it takes courage. For me, I mean, I'm pretty shameless, so I will speak my mind. I've learned that is not always in my best interest, but I've done it and I will continue doing it. I am just a little more aware of the consequences now because there are consequences. But for me to recruit other people and to convince them to come and be allies in this effort, I don't know how to do that. And I think that is a hard thing to do, especially for maybe, say, a white male that doesn't really see anything wrong with the system or doesn't really experience it. Maybe they see it, but maybe they don't experience it. And talking about it could have an impact on their daily lives. So the question is, how do we convince people to put their skin in the game?
That is exactly on the dot. when we're asking for active allies, when we're asking for bias buddies, we're asking people to take a risk. We're asking people to use their power, use their privilege, even if they don't know it or they didn't actively decide to have privilege, right? You have privilege by being a man. You have privilege by being cisgender. You have privilege by being straight, right? You have privilege by coming from a 2-parent household. You have privilege by coming from parents who went to college. Like, even if you worked your ass off to get to the position you have, Bob or Chris or Robert, you have that privilege and you have it. And it's not like, okay, now you should feel guilty and hate yourself for having that. It's like, you should see this as an opportunity of like, you can make change. And guess what? You're much less likely to get penalized for it than Jenny will. And so it's hard. It's hard to find allies. And I'm going to plug what we do, but in our workshops,
No, I think it's important to have tools, right? Because that is what we need. And we can have intentions, but if we don't have the tools, then we're not going to be that effective.
Exactly. So in our workshops, when we actually have people practice intervention techniques, we have people practice, thinking about and writing out and saying how they would intervene in a moment of bias, for example. And so in our workshops, when we talk to people about bias buddies, we say, okay, look around the room. All of these people right here, they can be your bias buddies. You've all been to the same training. You all know why this is important. So all of you can talk about it to each other. So sometimes all you need is just like one person to start talking about it. And it doesn't have to, like, say your company didn't put out a statement on Black Lives Matter. Say your company didn't put out a statement on Stop AAPI Hate, or, doesn't, support, I don't know, women in science and engineering, for example. They don't support WISE. But they talk about being inclusive on their hiring practices. All it takes is one person to be like, hey, this thing is in the news. And, I know that we really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, why don't we invite a speaker to come talk about it? Like, I think it would be cool to learn. So I'll start small, definitely. Like, if you're in that kind of organization and you're like, okay, we want equal pay, we want transparent salaries, we want no negotiation for bonuses. We want to make sure that we're donating into the community. Like, they're not going to be ready for that. And they're going to see like you bringing those things as an attack. Some people see it like that. Some people see it as an attack on, oh, you're doing it wrong, or you're terrible, you're racist because you haven't been doing this. That's not necessarily true. It's a struggle of like hundreds of thousands of companies across the state. I mean, millions of companies across the world, trillions. I don't even know how many companies there are in the world that have struggle of like, okay, we're chemists, we manufacture beer. Why is this an issue for us? Like, we're not like, I don't know, teaching, inner city kids how to, do tech. Why would this affect us? And so I think the first part is to just like open it up as a conversation. And once it starts being like something that people are talking about, then talk about like, hey, competitor so-and-so just started this series, or competitor so-and-so did an analysis of their diversity and they put it out on their website. Like, what does our company think about that? Like, that's interesting. And then as you start having these conversations, then you can start seeing, Bob is actually the one that's always like, yeah, this is great. Or yeah, Black Lives Matter, or they're the one that was like, everybody, let's read Dr. Kendi's anti-racism book. Like, that was the guy that keeps on bringing this up, or maybe they talk to you afterwards, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's out in public, right? It could just be somebody that talks to you later. That could be your bias buddy. And be like, hey, I think you're really great at doing this, and I think we have some similar values. Share your values, connect with them. See, like, hey, you have a kid, I have a kid. You went to Texas A&M, I went to Texas A&M. Oh, we have this shared commonality. And also, I see how much you speak up for these issues that matter to me. What do you think our company does really well when it comes to this stuff? And then where do you think we should grow? What's a good thing to grow? And then you think, I was thinking that it would be really great if, if we started, I don't know, having diversity workshops, if we started changing how we hire, if we started changing how we onboard, if we started changing how we do exit interviews, you just start somewhere. And then you slowly, you start gaining ground of like, okay, let's put this together. Bob, do you know somebody in HR that could help us with this? Do you know somebody, in like, I don't know, maybe they're the C-level person that can help with this? Maybe there isn't. Maybe there's nobody at the company that does that. Okay, let's speaker from that company that does the things that we want to have in our company. Let's have them come and give a talk about their research or their, latest patent or something, or the biggest thing, that the innovation that they have. And then we'll also ask them to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you know what I mean? Like, it can be part of the work. So for example, people that are in academia, we give them some data, right? Because scientists sometimes respond to data.
Hopefully. That'd be nice.
Yeah. And there's a lot of data about innovation and diverse workforces. And so they can talk about that. So for example, so you'd bring up, so there's several things to bring up. One is to bring up like core values, right? Okay, our core value in our organization is innovation. Well, the more innovative companies are diverse. So how can we make sure that we're more diverse so we're more innovative? If it's like, if the core values of the C-level folk are money, like, okay, well, when we have toxic cultures that actually cost us $16 trillion. Okay, so the U.S. economy has lost about $16 trillion over the past 20 years due to race-based inequality, according to Citigroup's study. $16 trillion. So you're leaving money in the trash by not being inclusive. You are losing money. Basically, if you think you're being successful, you could be so much more successful if you were equitable. And that's just anti-Black racism. What if we were looking at anti-Latinx? What if we were looking at anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-people with disabilities? Once we start looking at that, it's a lot, right? So all you have to do is find your shared values and then connect it.
And it's an interesting way to look at it as well when you talk about this $16 trillion that they are costing, because it's not an opportunity. It's not something nice that you would have. It's actually something that you are living, that you are experiencing. Like if a business in your organization was costing you $13 trillion or even just a fraction of that, you would be restructuring that business.
Yeah.
You would be doing something about it.
Emergency. We're losing money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very interesting point. Rather than saying, oh, we could make more money if we were more inclusive. Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
That is true. But the fear of all the money that you're costing your organization is going to, unfortunately, make you to act a little faster.
Yeah. Jenny, you actually said something. You actually had said something earlier in the podcast that I forgot to highlight in that moment. But I think you said, like, I was interviewing for jobs and I didn't choose to go with that company because they weren't doing as much D&I stuff as the other company that I ended up joining. Right there. That is a reason for companies to do that work, because they're losing out on talent if they don't have these things. Right? They're losing out on skilled people, smart people that work super hard, right? Like, by not having these things in place. Like, that is a highlight right there.
Yeah.
Like, that's how, when I was looking for jobs, that's what I looked for. Like, what do they say on Glassdoor? Do they have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program? Do they have anybody hired for that position specifically, right? Or is it just like, okay, they have one Black Lives Matter statement and that's it?
Yeah. And so we talked about at the organization level, maybe what we can do to start the conversation going or things like that. But I've also been in situations that some of them are personal, but some of them are professional situations. I have a very vivid example in my mind where I was at a table having dinner with the CEO of the company, my boss, and my colleagues, and other people in the field as well. And this person, one person who, by the way, has a women-owned business, his wife is the head of the business so that they can enjoy the credits of having a woman-owned business. I started talking about another scientist, and I said the name, and I said, oh, the scientist actually went to Texas A&M. She worked in one of the companies in College Station, and that was his cue to talk about her. And he goes, wow, that person, she's very aggressive. And I was like, okay, why do you say that? And he's like, oh, I was in this event. I was about women in 3D printing. And they were talking about how women get discriminated and how women are just not taken seriously. And she was just, very angry, and she was very aggressive. And I was like, oh, okay. And he happened to mention another person that was on the table, like having dinner with us, and like, right, for the sake of the conversation, we'll say Bob. He's like, right, Bob, you were there. What do you think? And Bob was like just smashing the food in his mouth. He's like, I am not going to engage. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh yeah, Bob, what do you think about it? And he's like, no, nothing. I don't remember. And so I was very angry.
Yeah.
I was very infuriated because I understood what was happening, right? So at that moment, I had to gather every single composure that I had and gather my feelings and try to respond in the most professional way that I could. And I said, actually, research from Google has found that women do get treated different when they go into interviews. And there's some body of research out there that says that we make decisions about hiring somebody as soon as they enter the room. And then we ask questions that validate our decision so that we look for evidence after we have made that decision. And so when these women are talking about these, that's what they mean. And usually it is related to unconscious biases because we all have them. So I responded because part of having a seat at the table is for me to say something about it when things happen, because then what's the point of having some progress, right? But I was very torn apart at trying to respond in a professional way versus just letting him have everything that I had to say about it. So do you have any suggestions or tools for how we can engage in these conversations that can be very difficult? And if we approach them with maybe facts and empathy, it could be more productive.
So first off, I am so sorry that happened to you. I could feel my own anger rising as I was hearing about this conversation that I'm not even in. So, and I think for the folks listening in, it's just like, sometimes you don't know what somebody has to deal with every day, right? And so getting another aggression or microaggression, I mean, people call it microaggression when it's not like overt, but it's just as harmful. It's a form of violence. And so receiving that is never easy. And, even though I do this as my work, I don't expect everybody to intervene every time. Yes, having a seat at the table does give you some power, does give you the opportunity. Like if you can speak up, that's great. But fortunately, there's lots of different things you can do. So first off, great on, being able to, sense that you were getting angry and trying to find an ally in the moment, which you tried and they weren't there for you. Great on, having the wherewithal to pull a fact like research, like that goes to show what great scientists you are. La doctora here, finding research in the moment as misogyny is happening. And, I don't feel bad about the way you responded. Like whatever you do, don't feel bad because you did respond, right? And that actually intervening in a moment like that, even if the outcome isn't what you hope, is a lot more than saying nothing. It would weigh on your psyche more. That research out there shows that. However, it is always important to take care of yourself. So like, you know, if somebody else is in the situation, but they had like a horrible day, I don't know, their dad died, or, you know, whatever, like maybe that's not the time to engage, and they shouldn't feel bad for not engaging, because you have to know your bandwidth, right? Like we're under constant trauma and stress. And if you're being, you know, stereotyped often, aggressed against often, you have less bandwidth, right? It'll make sense that you are more angry. You might not have the capability in that moment to find a fact or a research paper to cite. That's okay, right? And so barring that, if you are ready to engage, again, so bias buddy. So I don't know who else was in that table, but if there was somebody else in your company, for example, our fictitious person, Bob or Sam or Samantha or whatever, that has been on these, you know, at these, you know, big honcho level lunches or whatever, tell them like, you know, this happens to me all the time, and I hate when people do that. I would be awesome if you could second me, or you could, you know, back me up if I intervene in those moments, or I can give you a signal. Like when I rub my nose like this, that's when I want you to hop in, and then I'll second you, right? I'll like uphold whatever you said, because it's important that we interrupt that in the moment. So you interrupted that in the moment. Maybe you didn't get that person to retract, but everybody else that was within earshot got what you said. So you already made an impact. Right? Maybe that person isn't going to change, but the other people around you that heard what you said, they were impacted by that. So you already lessened the blow of that aggression. Okay. So, assuming that you're alone and there's nobody else there that you can lean on or whatever, and you're having this conversation and there's other, you know, C-level people there, you can always talk to that person after the fact. You know, maybe it's like that setting was too intense. Like, I think what you said was wrong, or that sounded misogynistic, and I know you're not a misogynist. You know, something like that. You're like, wow, that sounded like a total stereotype about women in leadership, and I know you're not a misogynist. So I think probably she was really upset by talking about the things that she encounters every day, don't you think? You know, I don't think you actually mean that she's aggressive. I think you mean that she was really upset in the moment. And, you know, and studies show that, you know, women that are assertive or, you know, speak with any sort of volume are perceived as aggressive, but they're actually not. You know, it's just that there's double standards, right? And, you know, so then you can give them like an out in that moment. You know, or like, you know, I think what you meant to say was, you know, she was really upset and you were put off by that. You know, you can like fix it for them in some ways. So one of the other tools is observing the problem. Like, oh, that sounded misogynistic. I'm sure you didn't mean to be misogynistic. Or, oh, ouch. You know, last time I met with them, they were really friendly and blah, blah, or, you know, like, you know, other people that I've talked to sound like they were really great. You know, why would you think that? And then he gives his example. Oh, she was really upset. Blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah. So why would you think that she's always like that? Wouldn't you be upset if, like, I don't know, people named whatever that person's, let's say their name was Randall. People that were named Randall are always told to get coffee for everybody. Wouldn't you be upset? Like, that would suck. So, like, that would make sense. Another way that you could redirect it is like, oh, that's interesting. So if you think that she's bossy, then you think, and you could name another important person in the field that maybe is really loud, and be like, so do you think that that other person is bossy and aggressive? Because they're also really loud. And the last time I went to see them give a talk, they were like yelling at everybody. You know, and or like I just said, you label the stereotype. And you used a great tool, which is transferring the work. Why would you say that, right? Like, sort of like, and then you could continue asking, well, why would you say that? I don't care what Bob thinks. Bob's obviously busy with his brisket. Why would you say that though? Like, oh, she was really upset. It's like, yeah, so did you interact with her outside of that? Like, why would you say that she's aggressive? You know, like, she's obviously talking about something she's really passionate about. Like, when you're talking about, I don't know, name a sport. Don't you get really loud? Like, sort of like continue questioning until they have to do the work of finding out that their connection was what's wrong.
Those are really powerful tools, I think. I hope that I can find sometimes the emotional intelligence to use them. Sometimes I get really, really angry. And so it's really hard for me to think rationally. In that scenario, I had a lot of things that, there were a lot of potential repercussions. So I did have to check myself. But that's not how I usually react. I usually am a lot more emotional than that. Yeah. And so I would display a lot more anger and less empathy. I think that's usually how I naturally react to these situations.
Of course. That's absolutely valid. You are right to get angry. Like I would not say don't get angry. That makes sense that you were angry. Anybody would be angry. That's a terrible situation. I think when I talk about these different tools, like I'm practicing those. So, practice what you want your response to be next time. So knowing that you got into this situation, like maybe that's something that you encounter a lot in your field. Practice some responses. What are the things that you're going to pull out of your hat? Maybe it's that research study. Maybe it's observing the problem. Maybe it's labeling the stereotype. Maybe it's talking about, a male figure in the field and how they're really angry all the time, but nobody calls them aggressive. Maybe but you have to practice it. So you write it out, you say it out loud. And then other things so from a facilitator's perspective, the things that we use when we're going into and things like that is we practice emotional regulation. So there's one thing I learned recently called 5-finger breathing. So you take your hand, wherever it is, it could be underneath the table, and you just breathe in. And you trace your fingers with the other finger. You trace your fingers on one hand with the other finger, and you breathe in, and you breathe out. And you breathe in and out. And so on for all of the fingers, and then trace it all the way back, right? And then feel yourself in your seat, and okay, all right, I'm feeling anger. Okay, anger will pass, right? I am safe, right? I am not under physical duress. And this is a moment that's really important for me to respond. How would I like to respond? It could be that they've moved on in the conversation by the time that you get you get calm, and you can say, hey, there's something that's just stuck in my mind. And, you were talking about the scientist and you said that she was aggressive. And I just got stuck there. I mean, I know you were talking about these other really cool things and I really want to hear about X or Y, but you said this and it just sounded off to me. Don't you think so? Why would you say that about her? Do you see? It's a little different. If you give yourself a little space, give yourself a little time, you could do that, or you could practice how you want to intervene. Again, if you can have that other person in the room with you, that helps too. Yeah. But practice it. That's really I know the onus becomes on you, right? But if you can practice it, then it's going to be more ready for you. If you, sort of envision it and how you would act, it's more ready for you. If you practice your 5-fingered breathing at other less tense moments, it's going to be accessible to you and your body's going to remember that's what you want to do when you're upset. Yeah.
This is a constant learning, right? I don't think that there is, it's good to be aware. And then once you are aware, you need the tools to start trying to make progress. Because like you said, with this, even if this doctor that was very well recognized in her field didn't feel like she could have any weight, then it's almost disheartening. But it doesn't mean that we can do the work in our own spheres, in our own circles, right? So Linet, there's 2 things I want to ask you before we close. One is, how can we hear about or learn more about the Unconscious Bias Project and the work that you do in your organization? And then I have a fun question to ask you at the end.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny, again, for reaching out to me and for doing this podcast and being such a resource for the community. It's so powerful. I'm just really grateful for that. If you want to learn more about what I do, you can go to ubproject.org. That's U as in unicorn, B as in beautiful, project.org. That's our website. You can also follow us on Twitter at UBP_STEM. We're also on Facebook, on Instagram. What else are we? Oh, and we also have a LinkedIn page, so Unconscious Bias Project. Or you can come find me. Definitely link up with me. I'm always up for networking with folks. You can find me on LinkedIn, Linet Mera, LINETERA. And look us up. If your organization, your company is interested in doing a climate survey to really get into what's working and what's not working at the organization, if you want to come have us give a talk, we give talks and keynotes. We do in-depth workshops for leadership for all staff, and we do custom programs for folks. So if you need consultation on writing a diversity, equity, inclusion statement, or you want to get started on creating a DEI strategy at your organization, we are the folks for that. We are a nonprofit, meaning that we are centering the mission. We're centering the impact first. And we do have sliding scales prices. So go ahead and hit us up, ubproject.org, or you can email us, ubp@ubproject.org.
Thank you so much, Linet. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Jenny. I appreciate all you do, and thank you so much for inviting us.
Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Latinx Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.